my new best friend Dan Gabbert and Chris Adams, who are going to speak today on sex addiction and pornography specifically. Both of them hold a master's in science, counseling, psychology, licensed professional counselor. And I hope that you sit around and ask a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you much. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're going to kind of blow through a little bit of information about us, then we'll talk about some objectives for the day. I'm going to turn it over to Chris. We'll dig in. Our practice, psychotherapy, so there are 4 of us in the practice. We focus primarily on sex addiction. We do a lot of work with folks with sexual trauma. Most people with addiction usually use the addiction as a way to cope somehow. That means most people with addiction probably have some trauma in their background. So we do a lot of trauma work in service of helping people get through the addiction. So we'll talk a lot today about the addiction, pornography, sort of the availability, what's happening, why it's blossoming, and really why we have a thriving practice and what's going on kind of in society around porn and sex addiction. But we'll talk a little bit too about sort of how we approach things. We use something called attachment theory. Anybody familiar, either Psych 101, so at least somebody, or psychology something? You've probably heard of John Bowlby or Mary Main and things like the strange situation experiments. They put kids in a room with a parent and they brought a stranger in and they watched the way the kids and the moms bond. All this stuff is based on how we connect with a significant other or a safe person. When you're a kid, that's usually mom or dad or primary caregiver. As we grow older, that becomes a significant other, a girlfriend, boyfriend, friends, and then eventually a spouse. When that attachment bond is broken and it doesn't feel safe because of something that's happened in your past, like trauma, it's really hard to find a safe place and connect. So we end up turning to something that's always going to react the same way. Drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, any addiction always gives you the same kind of hit. So rather than connect to a person who may not be available, we turn towards a substance or a behavior. That's kind of the way we practice from that mentality. So a little bit about where we go. So I'm Dan, Chris. We're both masters. We have Masters of Science in Counseling Psychology. We're both in Missouri licensed professional counselors. That's the LPC. As of Sunday, Chris is also CSAT. He just finished the training. Certified sex addiction therapist. So we both have what amounts to 4 weeks of on-site training plus about 30 additional hours of supervision. And by this point, we probably both have a few thousand hours of working with folks with sexual addiction, just in practice, day in and day out. What else can I tell you? Feel free to ask questions. If we say something, you're not sure what we're talking about or what a word or a term is, or just something pops in your mind, feel free to shoot up a hand and we'll take care of it then. As you can imagine, the content is not necessarily always PG-13, so you might hear us say some things like penis or vagina or masturbation. It's just part of the vernacular. I throw words out sometimes and I'm like, wow, and people look at me kind of funny and I'm thinking, that's just what I do 8 hours a day. So I hope that doesn't make anybody uncomfortable. Expect some words that might be a little, probably not, let's go R-rated. So here's what we're thinking for today, and we'll roll with whatever you guys want to do. Social impacts of pornography. Talk about compulsive porn use and what that does. We'll talk briefly about what that does to the brain, some neural pathways discussion. We'll talk about pornography and attachment. Again, attachment, sort of that constant, secure, safe connection that all human beings need to feel good in their skin and good in the world, and what porn does to that. We'll talk about the impact on the relationships and primarily a partner. And then we'll talk about some signs, some ways to sort of, is this a problem? Do I have a problem? Does somebody I know have a problem? And then again, questions at the end, questions as we go, feel free. Okay.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here, whatever your reason is. Some of the questions that kind of comes up when we do this kind of presentation is, why are we talking about pornography? Why is it such a big deal? Pornography has been around for a long time, and not just in the digital form that maybe we're all used to, but in some shape or form or another. So again, the question kind of comes up, why do we have to talk about this now? Why is it so problematic? And the answer that we can kind of give to that is this, what we call the 3 A's, and then this N that we've kind of added to that of digital pornography. So the 3 A's, access. Porn is accessible at your fingertips. Anywhere that you can get a connection to the internet, you can access porn. For some of us older guys or older individuals, we remember a time when pornography, if you were going to come across it, you found it in your parents' stash magazines, maybe in videos, or you had to go out and purchase a magazine, go to a video store. All of that's, well, it's not all gone, but you don't have to do those things now. So there's this, and kind of feeding into the third point, the anonymity, I can look at pornography without anybody seeing. So I don't have to experience the guilt or the shame of walking into a store, buying a magazine, buying a video. Availability is another point. You can get it on any device, pretty much any device that can access the internet. And there's a seemingly unending amount of content out there that is often free. I mean, there are sites where you pay for pornography, but for the most part, you can get it for free. So what this does is it provides a ripe environment for someone who can get hooked on it to use it in excess, to spend a lot of time using it, and maybe even do it in a way where they don't have to ever leave, which can contribute to something we'll talk about later, which is isolation. And then the last thing, the novelty, is if there's a sexual act that you can imagine, anything that you can imagine, I mean, your mind won't run free. There's probably some kind of image out there, some kind of picture or a video, and we'll talk about, when we talk about the brain, we'll talk about why that novelty is so important, or it becomes a critical point for individuals who get hooked on pornography use and may become addicted to it. So just a few information, a little bit of information or stats about pornography. First off, we find that some of the research differs, but the average age of exposure to pornography is about 11 years old. In our practice, we run into individuals that they can vary from 7 years old up to 11, 12, 13. And one of the things I want to point out is that oftentimes a person, or maybe if we're looking at a kid, doesn't run across pornography on purpose. In other words, they don't go out and search it themselves. They maybe find it because they typed in some other kind of search term and popped some kind of pornographic image. And then the way that a child's mind is, it's like, whoa, okay, this is surprising, it's shocking, but it's also kind of interesting. And then they may want to explore that a little bit further. Typically, when I talk about the sites, the porn sites that are visited, I will say something like, what do you think the top site was that was visited in 2013? And you might throw out something like Netflix, Amazon, or Twitter. But in 2013, and this is a little bit dated, but in that year they found that there were more porn sites accessed than all three of those combined. So it kind of gives you an idea of how much people are accessing pornography. Pornhub, which is one of the top free porn sites, in 2015, they had 21.2 billion visits in that year. And you can see that was enough porn streamed to fill up 175 million 16 gigabyte iPhones. So it kind of gives you an idea. That's quite a bit of data that's being streamed. 88% of porn content, when they analyzed it, found that there was physical aggression in it. This is going to be important as we talk about how porn can affect a person's development or their outlook on sexuality. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. And then the next point, so I don't know if any of you are familiar with what correlational data is. Correlational data means that we think that one thing might cause another, but we haven't had sufficient evidence to prove that there is causation there. But some of the data does point to pornography use and excessive pornography use causing problems with erectile dysfunction in young males. And when we say young males, we mean young males that are in their 20s, late teens, We might expect that kind of a problem in older individuals, but now we're starting to see that in young men, which is kind of alarming. So what this means is that and we've seen this too, is if we have an individual who has used porn for a long time, in their teens up until their early adult years, when they have opportunities to have any kind of physical intimacy, to be sexual with an actual partner, they may have a hard time performing. They might have a hard time getting or maintaining an erection. The good news is that what we have found is that individuals who move away from porn, they end up having a pretty quick bounce back as far as being able to have normal functioning in a short amount of time, but it means, kind of giving up that pornography.
One interesting thing on that. No, sorry. There it is. One of the interesting things about what Chris just talked about, because there are people over 40, over 50, when a gentleman over 50 has erectile dysfunction issues and has a history of pornography use, his kind of normal functioning comes back quicker and sooner than someone who is much younger. So if I have a 10-year porn problem and I'm in my 50s, when I stop, I get my full functioning back. If you're 30 and you've had a 10-year porn problem, it takes quite a bit longer to get full functioning back. And so there's a lot to be said about the way the brain functions, and when your brain has only been fed, a diet of pornography and the intensity that's involved with that, it changes the way you're able to be with another person, versus if I have a 20-year history of being with, kind of a normal adult human being, and then I start a porn problem, my brain actually bounces back to where it was quicker. So we're seeing with young men, not only is the problem more frequent, but it's also takes longer for it to kind of heal and clean things back up.
Yeah. And another point to that is the older individuals. So like we talked about earlier, that older individuals, it might be more normal to have ED problems, but a lot of times we can trace those to physical health issues, heart problems, prostate issues. But with what we see in younger individuals who are having a problem with this, especially if it's potentially connected to porn as it is, they can't find a lot of times a physical reason for it other than maybe how it's affecting the brain. And then going along with some of the research, the last point, we are seeing some evidence now that points to pornography use having the same effects on the brain that chemical addictions would have, so alcohol and drugs as well.
You want to talk about that? The Boone studies?
If you want to. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the potential developmental problems. So if you take an individual who started using pornography, early on in their childhood, early teen years, there are some things that could develop, and I guess not just with younger individuals, but with adults as well. So some of those, number one, it could sidetrack individuals from normal courtship behaviors. So here's what we see. We see somebody who they're maybe in their middle school, high school years, even up through college. They've been viewing porn maybe on a daily basis, and we'll see again later on that can contribute to isolation. So instead of being social, they may be spending time at home by themselves looking at pornography, and what it could potentially rob them of is that ability to interact with others, to start to learn what it means to date, and take away from doing that. It can also develop unrealistic expectations of sex and partners. So I talked about the physical aggression earlier. When pornography is all that a person knows, or that's their education about sex, they kind of get in their mind that, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and I'm going to use. So men and women in pornography experience aggression or physical aggression, but I'm going to use women because they tend to be the most targeted for this. But you might see pornography in which a woman is being harmed in some way. And when a person's watching that, what they're seeing is that woman or that man it looks like they're experiencing pleasure. but they're really acting. It's not real, or maybe they're under the influence of something. And so, again, if that's all they know about sex education, when they get out in the real world, it kind of raises that potential for thinking, well, that's what women like, or that's what men like. And doesn't mean that they'll necessarily become aggressive with that person, but again, it could be kind of a skewed idea of what a partner really wants. There's body image issues, both for males and females. So I see what the person looks like in porn. I see the female and the so-called perfect body that she has, or for guys, you see the guy with the large penis and think, I'm inadequate. So there's this feeling of inadequacy, again, on both sides of the gender lines. The closeness and bonding is replaced by a computer screen. So Dan referenced the attachment. Attachment, in order to attach to someone, I have to have interaction with that person. And typically face-to-face, eye contact, reading each other's cues, that social interaction. Well, if I lack that social interaction and I'm just interacting with the computer all the time, I lose some of that ability to do that. And this is especially important with the next point, the object-oriented versus other-oriented sex. So think about it this way. If I'm watching porn and it's not some kind of live stream thing, I'm not interacting with anything. It's all about me. It's all about me and my pleasure, because I don't have to worry about that computer screen. And what it takes away from is this balance that is part of healthy sexuality, which is it's about my pleasure, but it's also about the other person's pleasure. With a computer screen, I don't have to worry about any of that. I don't have to worry about that other person. So again, if that's the case for me and I get out into the real world and I'm dating and being sexual with someone, I haven't really built the skills to have concern for my partner and what he or she is experiencing.
At an attachment level, what happens is there's some really great, pretty recent, last 3 to 5 years, data that's come out. So think of somebody in your life that's really important. A parent, a sibling, someone that you're really close to. When you think of that person, you can remember a time when you've been together, you've had a conversation, you've turned to them with a problem and they were comforting or they were helpful or they were supportive, right? That's healthy attachment. That's why we turn to another person. What ends up happening with porn is I look to the pornography and I put myself into a fantasy role. I could have that girl. I could be like that guy. I could be like those people. And rather than having a real person to connect to and pull up memories and remember how we were together, make a phone call, wait and go see that person this afternoon or later this week when we get together for coffee, I pull up these images of porn, and that becomes what I attach to. And I lose that ability to connect, to converse, to be supportive, the give and take that Chris was talking about. In everyday life, I don't turn to my friend just to be in connection. I just think of porn, my mind wanders in that direction, and I don't have to deal with my stress every day. So it starts to replace that healthy, secure attachment with an object-based attachment that's unreal and unsustainable long-term.
So talking a little bit about the brain science behind how pornography use can affect us. First off, sex is a primal drive. It's right up there with the other things we need for survival. You know, food and safety. You know, it may not be as much of a necessity as food. I mean, we can still keep going, but we're programmed to further our society by procreation through sex. I mean, that's initially how we were kind of developed, set up, evolutionary speaking. But it is a primal drive. So, and the important part about that is that when you combine something so primal with what we're going to talk about with dopamine and the reward system, it becomes very powerful. And that the dopamine and the reward system, so in our brains there is this neurochemical called dopamine that is released when we experience something with pleasure. It's how we experience pleasure. And this happens not just with sex or pornography, but with food as well, which is why some people can they can develop addictions to food as well, because again, Food is it's a primal drive. It's needed for survival, and when we experience that with that dopamine release, it can become addictive. The reward system, this is this thing in our brain that helps us to remember or go back to those things that were pleasurable, because the brain has learned that if that's pleasurable and that helps us survive, we need to remember how to do that. It helps us to remember where to find food, where to find comfort, which works at an advantage for us from a survival aspect, but it could also work against us. So if anybody's ever experienced that, you maybe use a substance, for example, you drink alcohol, get really drunk one night, and you wake up the next morning and go, I'm never doing that again. That was not worth it. That was horrible. I feel like crap. And then what happens? You end up going back to it the next weekend. And you think, why do I keep on doing that? Because of the reward system. The reward system said, that was fun, that was good, that was pleasurable, let's go back to it. And it sort of ignores the consequences or the problems that come along with it. And what's interesting too is in the adolescent brain, and when we originally did this talk, we did it specifically about adolescence. That's why this is specific here. But so in the adolescent brain,
that's true up until about early 20s.
Yeah. So in the adolescent brain, there's this it's unequal. It's unbalanced as far as reward and pleasure and the executive functioning. So what I mean by executive functioning, it's this part of the brain that it does not develop fully until, like Dan was saying, until we're in our mid-20s, sometimes in our later 20s. What this part of the brain helps us do is make decisions. It helps us weigh the cost. It helps us say, well, wait a second, remember last weekend when you were really drunk and how bad you felt after that? Let's not do that again. Again, in the adolescent brain, that hasn't completely developed yet. And so that part of our brain goes, reward up here, risk is down here. It doesn't consider the risk as much. Again, going back to dopamine though, so when I experience these things, when I look at pornography, I experience a flood of dopamine. So this neurotransmitter is released, this neurochemical, and the brain is not supposed to, it's not evolved to experience that much of a dopamine release. So what it will do is it will downregulate that dopamine release by not releasing as much dopamine when we experience those type of pleasurable events. In order to get that same release, the brain now needs novelty, shock, surprise, increased use. Maybe you've seen this with substance use in some individuals, or maybe even in yourselves, where I use a drug or I use alcohol, and I got the effect. I got intoxicated, but then the next time I do it, I don't get the same effect, and so now I'm chasing that. I got to do more in order to get that same effect. And this novelty, again, I mentioned that earlier on. That's really important, because if a person is using pornography, again, in excessive amounts, and their brain starts downregulating that dopamine release, they start searching out for things that they might not have found arousing to begin with, or they might search out things that are disturbing. And here's kind of a caution that I'll throw out to everybody is, we have individuals that, and it's quite common, more than you'd think, who have been using pornography for a long time, and then all of a sudden they stumble onto something that includes a minor and those pornographic images. And again, their brain is pushing them towards that, and they don't put on the brakes because this is too risky. And what happens is they get caught, legal or law enforcement shows up at their door, they're confiscating devices, they're doing an investigation, and now we're talking about potential felony time in prison for having looked at pornography with minors. So again, that novelty is really important, because it can push us, escalate us into what we do.
So we'll talk a little bit about attachment again, not necessarily specifically in terms of pornography and sex addiction, but just generally in terms of addiction and the way it works. So what is healthy attachment? I've kind of alluded to this as we've gone, but again, I'll take you back real quick. So some of the early work that was done really in the late 1940s, and then some longitudinal studies that have worked since that time. So we know that what happens is, as children, in the first 18 months or so of life, we connect to that primary caregiver. We can't function on our own. We look to that person as, our safe place. When a child cries because it's wet or it's hungry or it needs a diaper change or it's cold or whatever, it needs someone else to take care of it. And when that interaction occurs in a correct way, we learn to trust other people. I'm a baby laying in my crib, I'm wet, I cry, mom comes over, picks me up, kind of cuddles me, sets me down, wraps me in a blanket. What did I just learn? I'm wet. I'm not important, my needs to be changed don't matter, or you can't trust other people to get your needs met for you, or I learned both of those things. And all three of those kind of combinations send me in what we call an insecure attachment. Over life, I either learned that I shouldn't ask for my needs to get met because I'm not worth it, can't rely on other people, I have to do it all myself, or both. And that's a really difficult place to live, is when I don't feel like I can trust my intuition and I can't trust anyone else to be supportive of me. In that space, we see a lot of personality disorders and sort of heavy mental health things come out. So what we wanted to be able to do is have that healthy, secure attachment. I need something, I ask for it, my needs get met, I learn that I'm important and I can trust other people to help meet my needs. As an adult, we do this through romantic relationships. Kind of teenage years, we look to friends, right? Everybody had that friend group in middle school or whatever, and then in high school, and then you turn to a dating partner or something, and that becomes your significant person. As you break away from mom and dad, it becomes friendships, then romantic partners, and then eventually significant other or spouse. When we don't have a secure attachment, again, we start going, where do I find a really repetitive, consistent way to deal with my troubles in life? I come home from work, I'm all stressed out, I need a drink. I come home from work, I'm all stressed out, I hit the computer, a little bit of porn, masturbation, I get all that release out, I feel so much better. Now I can go deal with my children, my wife, my family, whatever's going on in life. And guess what? Alcohol, porn, drugs, whatever, they're always going to react the same. Yeah, I've developed tolerance and I have, an increased need, but I can always go there and get the same kind of response. People, they have a bad day, I have a bad day, I turn to my spouse, I had a really bad day. She says, yeah, me too. I don't get comfort. And if I'm not securely attached, I learn, when I go to her for comfort, she's going to blow me off, so I just shouldn't go there anymore. And then I go searching for something else. And usually it's an object-oriented attachment that we find. Talk a little bit now about sort of the partner impact. So one of the things that we do is a practice. So Chris and I primarily work with people with addiction. There's a lady in our practice, Kathy Malone. Kathy's focus is on the partners. So not always women as the partner, but I'll talk about that because it's for reasons we can talk about if anybody's curious. Men usually seek treatment for addiction, for pornography, sexual addiction. Women are typically the partners. Now, it's not always the case, but a lot of women who struggle don't seek treatment, but oftentimes men will. So the impact, the partner now feels, I'm not going to really talk to those specifically. I'm just going to yak at you guys for a second. Partners tend to feel not good enough, not pretty enough, not sexy enough. What's wrong with me that he needed to go look at porn or he needs to masturbate? I thought I was fine. He's out having multiple affairs, multiple prostitution exchanges or whatever. The wife starts thinking, why did this happen to me? Why did God let this happen to me? What did I do wrong that he's doing these things? Has my whole life been a joke and a farce? Has this marriage been a waste of time? Do my kids, what does this mean for my family? It's a deep, deep impact. There's betrayal, trust is broken. The impact is huge. And I've had guys sit in my office and go like, it was just porn, what's the big deal? And I'm going, have you seen your wife yet? She is torn apart by this. It's not just porn. It's just as bad or worse. And I've had women say, if it was somebody else, if he was with some really hot blonde or whatever, I could see that. But it's porn. He'd rather do that than be with me. And what that does to her and her self-esteem and the impact and then the relationship and the dynamics, shatters families. I think I hit most of these actually right now. So that's really what we're talking about. We treat the partners from a perspective of betrayal trauma. This is not a co-addict and she's partly responsible, and if she would have only been better, then he wouldn't have had to do that, because that's not what the data tells us. The data since the mid-'80s that's been studied says most people who struggle with some kind of sexual compulsivity had an early exposure to sex, some kind of early attachment wounds, What are the 5? There are 5 things. Those are the 2 biggies that we see a ton. A lack of a same-sex role model growing up, either very lax or very strict parenting. So the person never gets to make those decisions or is forced to make decisions on their own. They're just told how it's supposed to be and they have to stay between the lines. Now they're an adult and they have options and choices and they don't know how to make those choices, so they make the wrong ones. So those are the biggies that end up happening. So that's what drives the addiction. So the partner actually oftentimes has no idea what's happening, and it's 100% betrayal for them. And so we see a lot of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms in our partners, and we treat it as betrayal trauma. Partners feel all these things. I'll talk about discovery and disclosure. So the partner finds out, right? Looking online or looking at a credit card statement and what's this charge for $100? What's this charge for $100? Or what's these withdrawals from the bank statement for this cash? Oh, he's seeing prostitutes. She finds something on his phone in exchange from a website or something, setting up a date. What's going on? That discovery is trauma to that person. Their world just got shattered. We often do a process called disclosure where the addict will write a letter explaining kind of the full layout of the extent of their addiction so that the partner, should she choose to stay in the relationship, knows exactly what she's agreeing to. That disclosure is traumatic for her. I've seen women shut down and go into shock as they're hearing all of the things that the husband's been doing. And we don't go into deep detail on that. That's not fair to the partner. It wouldn't make sense. It would not be healthy. But just even an overview, I've seen women just like shut down and go almost, like they're in shock. Sitting in my office, I'm freaking out going, what just happened? Wow, the first time it's traumatic to me as well. I blame myself. There is some impact on the physical side. Do I have an STD? What's happened? What's he got? What are we carrying? There's just so many questions that happen there. Family systems are obviously destabilized. And again, Chris mentioned this several times. She starts to pull back, so there's disconnection, isolation. Who do I tell about this? Tell my sister that my husband's been cheating on me? Tell my sister that my husband's been watching porn and ignoring me in the bedroom? I don't want to do that. The shame and the blame of that? Where do I go with this? So he has this problem. I end up taking the hit and being isolated and just totally separated from all my family. I stopped talking to people openly and freely because I'm afraid that it might come out in conversation, so I'm always on guard not to mention it. The impact here is significant to the whole family.
I'm going to add to that too. So if you're not in a relationship right now, a romantic relationship, you may be asking yourself, well, why is this so important to me? I don't have a partner. And I get that. I mean, I have some guys in my that I see, they're clients that they're not in a relationship, and they maybe they were in a relationship when they came in, but then that relationship moved on. The partner decided he or she didn't want to stay in that relationship, and now there's this kind of question of, well, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not in a relationship. The problem is that if I continue to have that sort of that belief or that mentality, when I do get into a relationship, again, I could be causing problems within it. And so I try to talk to those clients about, okay, maybe it's not hurting anybody right now, except for maybe yourself, which it often is. But think about that potential future relationship. If you wait to stop and you say, I'll stop when I get in a relationship, likelihood is you're not. And you're going to continue that, and then we see people keep the secrets, and then it causes the damage we're talking about here.
So things like fear of abandonment. I don't have my secure base. I have a couple right now that we're working with, and for probably 7 years he was working late, which was not working late. He was all over the community, driving out of town, hooking up with people, mostly, just one-time hookup kind of stuff, but compulsive, life, job primarily, extremely stressful, very high-stress job. Didn't know where to go, didn't know who to talk to, didn't feel like he could, because if he told his wife that he was struggling or that he felt, all stressed out, he said, I'd be so afraid that she's going to fear that I'm going to do something wrong, lose the job, get fired. Couldn't tell her I was struggling. So what do I do? So he started acting out and, messaged with people, eventually took the giant step, was sexual with somebody, and then it just got out of hand and kept going. She says, I can't talk to him about anything because now I'm so afraid that I'm going to put more stress on him. She loses her secure base. He can't go to her and talk about what's going on because she's afraid she's going to leave him. I mean, he's already done enough damage. One more thing could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So the relationship now, there is no connection left, and that's what we're trying to rebuild through individual work and couples work that we're doing with them. And again, a lot of this, has everything been a lie in our relationship, and why? Oftentimes we see this where, a partner will just kind of withdraw, just pull away, and any kind of attempted connection from the addict gets met with attack. You did this to us, this is your fault, the blame. She's hurting and doesn't know where to go with it, and the attack is the only thing that feels like it's going to give some relief. It doesn't, but it feels like it. You or me?
And take.
Okay.
So one of the things we want to talk about before we wrap up today is some of the signs that we would commonly see with someone who is maybe their pornography use has become compulsive or excessive, causing problems in their lives. And when you look at the list up here, you probably notice that there are some things that all of us have experienced. Loneliness, depression, anxiety. With November, you guys are getting close to the end of the semester. You're probably experiencing a lot of distress. The anxiety is probably there. Relationship problems. I mean, it doesn't just have to be romantic relationships. We're in relationship to our friends, our parents, school, people we're in school with, and so there's always relationship problems. Problems with concentration. And what I'll say about this is, we may have experienced some of this, so that just because you have these and maybe you are using pornography doesn't mean you have a problem, okay? It's when these things that you see up here start going above what you normally experience. So maybe you had some loneliness, but now it's more, I'm isolated. I'm not connecting with people socially like I was before. My depression has gone up, or I'm more anxious. Relationship problems have increased. I have problems concentrating because all I can think about it, there's this preoccupation with pornography. So I leave wherever I look at pornography and I go try to do my normal thing. I try to go to school, go to work, but all I can think about is, gosh, I can't wait till I get home or wherever I go to look at pornography. And because of that preoccupation, you might start to lose interest in activities that were previously enjoyed. Or there could be, you start to see performance in work or school drop. And then these last four signs, these are actually sort of the main things that we use to diagnose addiction. So the first one I mentioned, the preoccupation, and we see individuals that can lose hours or days by looking at pornography. Again, going back to that idea of novelty and the increased use that I might experience to get that same high. I'm spending a lot of time trying to find that perfect image. Irritability or agitation when unable to view porn. I've had guys that have talked about maybe they have a day off during the week from work, and then their partner ends up having the day off as well, and they get irritated that, well, now that he or she is home, I can't watch porn and masturbate. Rather than, oh, hey, now we get to spend time together, it's more of that irritation. Viewing pornography and masturbating becomes primary or exclusive way to regulate. So in the very beginning, Dan talked about using addiction or some addictive process as a way to cope with distress. When it becomes, and here's the thing, is like sex or some other things that we use, maybe substances, it may make us feel okay for a period of time, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's bad, or it's problematic, I should say, when it becomes my only way to regulate those emotions. I don't have other healthy ways to do that, so again, it causes problems with relationships, or I continue to use this substance or this behavior, and I just can't stop. It's just a never-ending cycle. And then inability to stop despite efforts or known consequences. We often have people that come into our offices that say, I've tried to quit before, and even though I got caught before, or it caused problems at school, caused problems at work, I still can't stop. Remember that reward system, it just keeps coming back, or it keeps me coming back to that thing even though I've experienced those consequences before. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, so there's a few ways when you think about, do I have a problem, or does somebody I know have a problem? So there's this thing called the Sexual Addiction Screening Test, or the SAT. It's available on our website, which is listed there, and you can just Google FAST and you'll find it. It's on a number of websites plus You guys may be familiar with AA or NA. What did you guys say? Who talked yesterday? You said opioid? So somebody I'm sure talked about NA. Yeah. No?
This is more about the stats.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the 12-step community started in the 30s with Alcoholics Anonymous. So a lot of people know about AA and sort of what happens and sort of how it works. There have been a development of a lot of 12-step fellowships over the years, including primarily 4 around sexual addiction. So I'll give you the alphabet soup. It's SA, SAA, SCA, and SLAA. Sex Addicts Anonymous is SAA, Sexaholics Anonymous, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. Don't need to know all those things. This website is hosted and run by an organization, a nonprofit here in town, and it lists all of the 12-step, well, most of the 12-step meetings around town where sex addiction is discussed, the locations, times, all that kind of stuff. A couple of them have hotline numbers or help desk information. And on this site, too, there are sort of write-ups about each of the fellowships, how they differ. So if you're looking for something like that or you know somebody that's struggling, it's a great spot to send them to. And most of the 12-step communities you're talking about, you're spending a few dollars at a meeting to help pay for like a room rental in a church or coffee or something like that. It's a really inexpensive way to get help and get started. You're not going to dig deep. It's not going to help out with deep trauma. It's not going to do the kind of work that a therapy group or an individual therapist is going to work with. But it's a great way to find accountability and really sort of gain an understanding on and a foothold on getting healthy.
One of the things we haven't talked about with this addiction that I think is really important to kind of contrast from other addictions is the shame that can be involved with this. I mean, who likes going and talking to somebody about sex? You know, if anybody has ever had that, a lot of people we encounter, their parents haven't talked about sex, but if they have had that experience, it's really awkward, it's uncomfortable. And even individuals coming in to talk to us, they know that this is what we specialize in, but it's still really uncomfortable. I mean, we see sex everywhere. We see it in all of our social media, but not a lot of places where we actually talk about it. So there's a lot of shame that comes along with this. And I bring that up because that 12-step group, those 12-step groups, for people who are really struggling with it, it gives them an opportunity to be around others who are struggling with the same thing. And it's not this, we're going to go in and talk about all of our great stories about our porn use and our sex. It's more about the shame and how bad I feel about this. To hear other people talking about it and be able to share that experience, it's really powerful. And then I'll kind of close up that with this comment too. So I mentioned we don't talk about sex a lot, and it's really difficult. In fact, Dan and I were just talking about a client that his wife brings it up, anything about sex, and it really is hard for him to talk about it. And that really closes down the intimacy. And I mean, when I mean intimacy, I mean physical, but also emotional intimacy, that two people, the connectedness that two people can experience in a relationship. So I just encourage people to talk about it. You know, it's embarrassing, it's awkward, but it doesn't have to be. We can have conversations about it, and that way we don't continue to develop problems with addiction.
A few options, since the internet is sort of our antithesis, I guess, or the enemy when it comes to pornography. There are some really good things out on the web, too, where they're trying to really dig in and help out. Your Brain on Porn is a great site. A lot of good content out there. I think Your Brain on Porn, Fight the New Drug, both have YouTube channels as well. A lot of good videos on both. Am I not on? Oh, yeah, how about that? Sexhelp.com is the ITAP, International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. That's the group that Chris and I did our training and certification through. Not only some good information out there, the SASTA's out there, there's a couple other assessments for partners, for addicts. There's a handful of really, really good assessment kind of tools out there. And then again, we mentioned the local group here in Kansas City. A really great book too, Rob Weiss and Jennifer Schneider did, Always Turned On, Sex Addiction in the Digital Age. Rob is one of the trainers that does our certification training. In fact, Chris was with them this past weekend. A really good, really easy, approachable book that really addresses sort of the big picture of society and just how intense not only sex but pornography has just permeated everything that we do and see.
One thing I want to add,
Yeah.
that Dan talked about that SAST, that screening test that you can find online through our website or other places. If you do go out there and do that because you wonder if you have a problem, just because you answer a lot of questions yes doesn't mean you're addicted. It's a tool that we use to try to find out, is there potential for addiction here? So I just want to throw that out so you're not alarmed if you take that.
Right. Now, it's up to you guys. What questions? What did we miss? What are you wondering about? What's left?
You mentioned that more men than women seek help.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is?
Good question. Yeah, so more men than women seek help. Usually what will happen is, I say that, but, this is you don't know what's happening when nobody comes for treatment, so it's kind of hard to say. What we believe is happening is a man gets caught and the woman says, you need to go get help or I'm leaving. And he faces this crisis of losing his family, so he goes and gets help. A woman gets caught cheating and the man says, I'm out of here. And so she's not, pressed into going to get help, so she doesn't. I've seen it a couple of times when the woman's come in to get help and she goes through a lot of the process and she's getting healthy. One woman that I'm thinking of actually went inpatient for a while. There are several inpatient treatment centers around the country that treat sex addiction. She went inpatient, she came back a month later, we did a full disclosure, she laid it all out what had happened, and then he left. And it was like the whole process was for him to make her tell him the story of her addiction. He was going to leave the whole time, but we didn't know that until after it all went down. So same kind of a thing. She's doing this, I'm out. He's doing that, I want him to get help or I'm going to leave.
And I think another layer to that is the shame. I mean, we talked about this being a shame-based addiction, but I think even more so it can be for women, because when you think about pornography, we hear this all the time. Every guy does that. Every guy watches porn. Well, for one, not every guy, and I always ask people, did you go out and survey every guy out there? But it's more kind of commonplace or accepted for men, so to speak, whereas for women, maybe not the case. And so I think there's just more shame that comes with that, and I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah.
I have a question. What is the success rate? Do you have any statistics on people that come to see you? Is this something they can get past? Because a friend once told me it was his demon.
Mm-hmm. You want to take a shot at it?
I'll take a shot at it. Well, in speaking to the demon, you'll hear a lot of people that will say, compared to other addictions that a person has experienced, this is the worst that they've experienced. And here's the reason why. Again, going back to the sex is a primal drive, number one. Number two, it's an addiction that I can do in my own head. I don't have to go out and ingest a substance. I don't have to drink alcohol. I don't have to shoot up whatever the addiction of choice for that person is. I've seen pornography. Now I have a mental picture of it. I can fantasize about it. I don't even have to look at the video and my mind can go to that. And that's problematic when a person is in a relationship and they're trying to be intimate, sexual with their partner, and they keep on having these images come up. So back to your original question, though, I don't have, maybe Dan, you have some exact numbers. I don't have exact numbers, but I think it's a pretty good success rate, with the caveat of if that person is willing to put in the work to help themselves in that addiction, that they're willing to go to 12-step meetings, to not actually go, but actually work those programs, to see and talk to others about the problem, to get accountability partners, because again, people who have come in and they said, I've tried to quit before, they tried to quit on their own. It's like going cold turkey with cigarettes. It's hard to do. I need to have that accountability. I've got to have people that I trust and can count on to say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Can you help me out? Can you kind of help me, hold me accountable, or at least, not, and a lot of guys have problems, again, with that every guy does it. So if you're talking to a friend and you're saying, man, I'm really struggling with pornography, another male friend might go, what's wrong with that? It's not a big deal.
Everybody does.
Yeah, everybody does it. So again, it's finding trusting people that you can talk to about it, to have that accountability. If you just think, well, I can give it up, and some people can. I'm not saying that you can't. But that's, I think, those are the kind of the factors that go into being successful at, it's a thing that it may never just go away. It's not like a cold that you get over it or you get cured. For some people, it's a lifelong thing. I'm always going to be in the face of things that are sexually provocative. Just like an alcoholic might find themselves in a place where somebody's drinking. That doesn't mean they're going to pick it up again, but they have to have had steps or things that they can do to help themselves when they get in those situations.
Yeah, addiction is, it's not a cure, and that's the key thing I think Chris is talking about. And I think what we do in treatment different than you find in 12-step is we go digging for the root cause. What's the attachment wounds that are there, and how do we heal those? And we know how to do that work, and that tends to give people a lot more success going forward. But yeah, nobody is, oh yeah, I used to have that and now I don't. It's a lifelong thing, and you're going to have to manage it differently. Just like you'll never hear somebody that's been alcoholic sober 20 years or 30 years say, yeah, I used to be an alcoholic, now I'm not. They'll say I'm in recovery. And that's the mindset that tends to work best. Yeah, Catherine.
So somebody who is chemically addicted to whatever, liquid, powder, or whatever it is,
Mhm.
their addiction travels along with them even though they've stopped using and they're in recovery. Their addiction travels with them. And so that if they do resume, they're back at the same place, they're back at a more progressive place.
Or they get there much, much quicker. Yeah.
Right, or they get there very quick.
Yeah.
So is that the same for sexual addiction
Yes.
too?
Yeah. We think about what we're really talking about. I think when Chris hit the slide about the dopamine in the brain, that's probably what we're really addicted to, right? It's one thing to say, I'm an alcoholic. No, I'm not a rumaholic or a beeraholic, right? It's alcohol. But I have different vehicles to get that drug into my system. Oh, no, I drink fine, expensive wines. I'm not an alcoholic. How much do you drink? 2 or 3 bottles a day. But it's expensive, so I'm not an alcoholic. It doesn't work like that. If you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. We're a dopamine hit. We're an intimacy disorder, and I'm looking for a dopamine hit to feel good. And I find that however I can, and, I watch porn, and then I get more novelty or more new or more different, and the dopamine is really what I'm attracted to. It's giving me the hit in my brain that I'm looking for. That's just the vehicle to get it.
And one way to think about it conceptually too is when we do something over and over again, in our brains we develop these neural pathways that strengthen each time we do it. If you imagine like a big semi-truck driving down a dirt road, country dirt road that's been rained on, it starts to create these big ruts on the road to where if another vehicle tries to drive down that road, they're going to fall into those ruts. Okay, so that's addiction. We keep going back into those ruts. In order to stop it, first we've got to get the truck off the road, which is stopping the pornography use. And then we come back in with things like 12-step group and therapy and accountability, and we start to fill in those ruts with rocks and gravel and dirt and all of that to build those ruts back up. But the thing is those ruts are still there, and I think this is to your point of it travels with you. Those ruts are still there to where if that semi comes back down that road, there's a good chance it's going to go back into those ruts. It may happen very quickly, or it may take some time, but they're still there, and it's still a vulnerability for that person that struggles with addiction.
Yes, ma'am?
Talk about how in a relationship, if you're single, then well, it doesn't matter to me, but in the future, when you're into a relationship, it does. What time scale do you think would be appropriate for a recovering addict to disclose to a current?
That one is such an easy question to answer. I'm going to let Chris take it. You go with that.
Okay, go. Yeah, that's a great question. It comes up more often than you might think. and I don't have a perfect answer to it, but I think what I try to talk clients through is maybe it's not right away like first date material, but it probably ought to be early on, because, and this goes back to the attachment, the intimacy, the honesty. If I can start out of the gate with being honest with that person, and that person can accept me and say, man, I'm so glad you told me that. You know, I feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I like the fact that you were honest with me and told me about that. That goes miles. It goes miles beyond, oh, you're some kind of pervert who had a problem with pornography or some kind of addiction. So yeah, it's not a real black and white answer, but I'd say early on in the process. So
Probably before you're sexual.
yes, that's a good point.
That's what I usually stress. So where are you guys? How much, you know, how important is this person to you? And, you know, if it's going to come out eventually, how much are you going to invest before you tell them? And then it's like, wow, you led me on. First date's too fast. Waiting till you're walking down the aisle. Oh, by the way, I got this thing I need to mention. Probably not the right time. Yeah.
It's a small problem.
Yeah.
And it's a shameful, it's a hard thing to talk about. It makes a person very vulnerable to talk about those things, but that's a big part of what we do when we treat clients, is being vulnerable, talking about the difficult stuff that not everybody is talking about, because that's what helps to reduce the shame that I feel that also keeps me coming back to that addictive process.
Yeah, Chris mentioned this when he talked about groups, and there's an author that we both really like, Brene Brown. She's done a lot of work around vulnerability, but one of the things she talks about is the paradox of shame, and we see it a ton with clients. That one thing that is so shaming that you could never talk to anybody about because it's so terrible, when you talk to them and they go, oh yeah, me too. Or they go, oh, that's it? Okay. Suddenly all that shame starts melting away, and it's this crazy paradox that the thing that I most am afraid to talk about, when I talk about it and it's received, it's gone, and it's like, oh, I'm okay too. And that's what happens with groups. That's what happens in an early relationship. I tell this person and they don't freak out, and everything starts to get okay, and now we can have a real conversation about it. But when I'm in my head and it's just I could never say anything, oh, if they only knew, it's never going to get better.
We have one more minute. If anybody wants to ask a burning question? No? I think that was pretty good.
Oh, good.
Very